Welcome to Bonehead. This week's episode is William Malone. William Malone is a filmmaker.
He directed things such as The House on Haunted Hill reboot by Dark Castle,
Fear.com,
Parasomnia, and one of the best Tales from the Crypt episodes ever,
as well as an episode of Masters of Horror.
Fair Haired Child, which is one of my favorites.
Same here.
He told some great stories, and I can't thank him enough for coming on the show. He didn't have to. He's probably one of our biggest guests, probably our most, nothing against him, a lot of our other guests, but probably one of our more high-profile guests.
He also is well known as being a collector, and we're going to do some episodes about collecting coming up. And he had the world's biggest, at one point, Forbidden Planet collection.
Yeah, absolutely. He owned Robbie the Robot, just sold that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his films. We're going to talk about his TV work.
When he worked at Don Post, he designed a certain mask that you may know from a certain John Carpenter film. He'll talk about that. He'll also tell us about some stories about a certain musical group from England.
The Beatles, and then some strippers, and then Klaus Kinski. So tune in, watch this, subscribe, and let us know what you think. Here it is. All right, welcome to Bonehead. I'm Joe Lewis.
James Thomas.
And we're missing somebody today. Who are we missing?
Chad. Are we missing him, or is he just not here? Give me that.
So anyway, our special guest today is Mr. William Malone. How you doing, Bill? You're right there. When we cut all this together, you'll be able to watch it later. It's really easy to remember what all you directed because it's right behind you. As far as two of your films, where's the Parasomnia poster?
It's actually in the hallway.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Or Titan Find or Creature? Do you have a...
See, this is all hidden away. See, there's no more. I don't usually have my posters out, so most people don't actually get to see them if they come over to my house because it's like, yeah, whatever. You know.
Where did you keep Robbie?
He was in my. I have a theater in my house, like a little theater, and he was in there for years and years, and you know, I had him for almost 40 years. So
I know, and you had the sled too, right?
Yeah, the blueprints called it a Jeep, so that's what I always referred to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was Robbie's Jeep. But yeah, I had that. That was in my garage for years. And I always had visions of restoring it, but I just never got around. There's just too many things to do. You know, so.
Well, yeah, you had a career. But anyway, I'm getting off topic, and we'll get to Robbie the Robot in a little while. But you're a major filmmaker. You've made House on Haunted Hill, Fear.com, Parasomnia. You worked with Klaus Kinski, which we will get to, I'd like to, in a little while, because everyone should have a batshit Klaus Kinski story, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, you haven't lived till you've worked with Klaus, I guess.
Yeah, whether that be good or bad. So, going ahead and getting started, you grew up in Michigan. What did you start making short films when you were a kid? How'd you get into movies?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess like a lot of people, I started making like 8mm movies. I think my parents bought me a 8mm movie camera when I was probably about 11 or 12. Of course, I didn't have the money for the film and processing, so production was limited.
I know people don't know how good they've got it today, right? It was just,
what's that?
I said the kids don't know how good they've got it today, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, gosh, if I would have had the stuff that's available to kids now, man, I would have gone crazy. You know, because you can do visual effects now, and and I was trying to I was doing like glass plate stuff, and doing painting. I was trying to recreate Metaluna, from this island Earth. And I remember taking a little model DC-3, and I had a little fan, and I'd make the propellers go with the fan, starting them up the engines and stuff.
So, what was some of the movies that were your influence when you were young?
Well, I mean, I guess probably most kids growing up my age. I mean, I guess the biggest movie that influenced me the most, I guess, was Creature from the Black Lagoon. It wasn't the first horror film I'd seen. My parents took me to see Day the Earth Stood Still
Yeah.
in a drive-in, and I remember I was so young that I wasn't even afraid of the robot or anything. It was just like I just remember saying, "Oh, this is a big iron guy walking around," But my mom, when I was 6 years old, took me to see Creature from the Black Lagoon, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I remember spending most of the movie like this, like that, ducking behind the seats, and but there was something about it that really caught my imagination. I guess all the underwater scenes, and Julie Adams in her little outfit.
But you're not the only one. I mean, there's hundreds of directors. I mean, Del Toro just made his love letter to it, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
he talked about always thinking, why didn't she fall in love with a creature? And he's like, fuck it, I'm going to go make her fall in love with a creature and get nominated for Academy Award.
When you're a kid, it's like, when I was a kid, I didn't identify with the heroes. I identified with the monster, and
Right.
The monster carried the girl off, and stuff. So
I don't know that it's all kids, though. I think it's kids like us who identify with a monster. And I don't mean to put you in that group, so sorry, but I think it's the odd ones, right? The ones who are probably a little bit more creative.
I'll wear that mantle. I was definitely a weird. Look, I grew up in my town that I grew up in, Lansing, Michigan, was probably 110,000 people. And out of that, there were literally 3 kids that were into horror in the entire city. Yeah. And you were definitely an oddball if you had a copy of Famous Monsters in Filmland.
Or knew who Uncle Forey was, right?
Exactly, yeah. So,
well, we grew up in rural eastern Kentucky, if that makes you feel any better. So 110,000 would be a huge metropolis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what other interests did you have? I know you had your own band. You were into rock and roll.
Well, yeah, but before that, I think, it's funny. I was reading about Stanley Kubrick, and we have almost exact same background in terms of, his parents bought him a Graflex camera. Well, that's what I asked my parents for a camera.
Yeah.
And I said, I really want a good camera. So I don't know what possessed my mom to do it. She went out and she worked, because we were poor, not poor, but we were not definitely not rich.
Working middle class, right?
Well, probably lower middle class, and it was hard making ends meet. But she went out and saved her money and bought me a 4x5 Graflex camera. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's like the old kind with the bellows, and I still have it actually here someplace. And it's got like the flash attachment and the bellows put up,
Right.
And the film was so expensive. Even in the day, it was about 50 cents a shot. Now, back when I was a kid, that was a fortune. So It was actually great training for me, because every time you took a picture, you had to really think about it. You went, okay, do I really like the framing? Is this going to be cool? So then you take the picture. And it was a great training ground, really. And even to this day, I just got a digital camera. You can just go, pop, pop, pop. I still only take maybe a handful of pictures with my digital camera, because I still have that mindset,
You could probably write a whole book about how that changed a generation of filmmakers, right? From you just shoot today, you shoot and you figure out the movie later on in the editing room, correct? You just shoot a shit ton of coverage.
I think it was a great training ground for me.
Yeah.
I think all people should really start out with film before they shoot digital, because it does really train your eye to look at composition and that kind of stuff. And I bought books on it and all that stuff when I was 12 years old, so it was definitely an interest, and that's what sort of propelled me into filmmaking. So,
who are some of your influences as far as directors go? When did you kind of figure out what a director was? I'm curious. You know what I mean? That like a director made the movie?
I don't think I really knew who directors were until, probably I was, 15 or 16 years old or something like that. And I knew, of course, who Alfred Hitchcock was, because he had a regular television show.
He was his own personality. Yeah,
and he was like a personality. But, I didn't know who directed Creature from the Black Lagoon, or or any of my favorite films. So, and the idea of being a director, growing up and being a director, that was just so alien that just wasn't even a concept.
Yeah. Well, later on, who were some of the filmmakers that you do look at and you do admire and that you kind of go back and watch their stuff?
Not ones that most people, think about.
That's
Like
great.
obviously, Jack Arnold influenced me with Creature from the Black
Right.
Lagoon, but also, I guess Richard Fleischer, for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and things like that. And then, but a huge influence was Gerd Oswald, who, I don't know if you know who Gerd Oswald is, but he directed probably half of the Outer Limits episodes.
Okay, yeah.
And he directed the ones that were really cool and weird.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you remember the show very well, but there's one called Corpus Earthling, which is a very scary show for a television show, particularly back in that day.
Right.
And he directed that. But he always had he was a German expressionist, and he grew up with that whole mindset. It had weird angles, and it used wide angle lenses up close and things like that. So.
But you're a big fan of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari too, right? Is that a big influence?
Yeah, Caligari's a big influence, but probably F.W. Murnau.
Mm-hmm.
I consider him the greatest director that ever walked the planet.
Right.
And the reason for it is that when you go back and look at his films, they're so different than anything else that was out at the time. And it wasn't like today where you can look back and, most directors, upcoming directors, basically emulate other directors from movies. Well, This guy didn't have that. There wasn't any of that stuff to look at. He was inventing it as he went.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just amazing.
Other than I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to just inject one thing. He made a movie called Sunrise, which is not a horror film, but it's got some really interesting stuff. He didn't have an extreme wide-angle lens, but he saw it in his head what that would look like. So he had the sets constructed to look like a wide-angle lens,
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. He's got the sets go back at forced perspective, and then he's got stuff tilted at angles, and the sets are actually constructed to look like like if you had a 15 millimeter lens or something.
I gotta go check it out because we've seen Nosferatu and we know who he is, but I've never seen it. I need to check it out.
Have you ever seen Faust?
I've seen parts of Faust. Does that make sense? I've never actually seen it from beginning to end.
Oh, it's genius. The two you have to see Faust and you have to see Sunrise, because they're both just astounding movies, just in their the cinematography and the way things are constructed.
Right. Well, there's a lot of people who think that cinema died when people could talk. Have you heard that before?
I mean, there was that mentality, and in some ways it did die for a time, and mainly because sound restricted the movement of cameras, where they had been very fluid before during silent era, and then suddenly they became very stagnant because of just physicality. So
right.
Yeah.
So you left Michigan. Did you go to just do rock and roll in L.A., or did you want to do movies, or was it kind of a combination of both?
I came out to be in a rock and roll band. I had a band called the Plagues in Michigan. And we put out some 45s, and we had a mild amount of success. And we had a huge fan club and so forth. And I'd come out to Los Angeles, and I just couldn't find 3 other guys who weren't on drugs long enough to show up to rehearsal. So I gave up on that fairly quickly.
So you're telling me you're the one who was not on drugs in the band?
I was actually, when the hippie movement was going on. I was the weirdo of the hippie movement, if that can be, because I was dressed like John Steed.
Right. So it was not sex, drugs, and rock and roll for you, huh? It's just the rock and roll?
I had long hair, but I had the bowler hat and the suit.
So you had long hair and a suit with a bowler hat.
Yeah.
The Avengers would have looked a little different, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just a tad.
The Avengers would have looked a little different.
With a proper English brolly.
Really quick, do you want to tell the story that you and I were talking about right before we started filming about you meeting the Beatles? Or is it something you've told a lot and you don't want to? I mean, I don't want to.
Actually, I don't think I've ever discussed it actually on camera. So,
well, then that would be a great one for us. But I don't
there
want
you
you to feel like you have to share it with
go.
the Hicks from Kentucky.
Not at all. I'm a hick from Michigan, so there you go.
That's fine.
In any case, no, what happened was back in 64, February 9th, 1964, I was planted in front of the television like everyone else on the planet watching the Sullivan Show. And to give it a little history, if you're not of that era, what a lot of people don't understand is it was from one day to the next, it was a different world. That's the only way I can explain it. The next morning after the Ed Sullivan Show, the only topic of conversation in school, including the teachers, was the Beatles and the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, the entire world had turned, upside down. And suddenly the jocks, who were like the big men on campus, could not get arrested. They couldn't get a date.
Really? Yeah.
I went in, I combed my hair down the next morning thinking that, it was going to be a giggle, and of course all the jocks, look at you, asshole, But, hey, and I went, wait a minute, this might work for me here.
You started getting attention from the ladies.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but in any case, so the world changed, and for me, I became a huge fan of the Beatles. Just really loved their music and stuff. And in September of that year, they had a concert at Olympia Stadium in Detroit, and I wanted to go see that concert. Now, I didn't have tickets; I couldn't get tickets. But I talked my folks into taking me to Olympia Stadium, which was about 100 miles away. So it was a good drive. And
good talking, by the way.
Yeah, I did some fast talking, I guess. And I guess what their plan was is they were going to go to some dinner place while I was at the concert, which was great. So anyway, so they dropped me off in front of Olympia Stadium, and there was like 15,000 girls, literally 15,000 girls out in front of the stadium waiting to get in. And I'm looking at them going, I gotta get in there somehow, And so I went up to this cop who was standing there, and I said, and I put on my best British accent, I'm on this band and I'm supposed to play before the Beatles go on, but I don't have any pass because I got my show clothes on. And he looked at me and he went, okay, well, I'll tell you what, you stay here, I'll be right back. I didn't know what he was doing. He came back with 3 other cops. They gave me a police escort into Olympia Stadium. Past all these girls. Girls are screaming. They don't know who I am, but I got a police escort. And I should point out, I was the first kid in my entire city with long hair. And I was wearing one of those jackets like the Beatles wore. I had the collarless jacket. Yeah. Anyway, so they're screaming. They hand me off to this other cop inside Olympia Stadium. It was like a security guy. He takes me through this long route backstage and plants me in this room, which is probably 40 or 50 by 30. And it's a big white room. And I'm standing there and he's got a hold of my arm and he's trying to find somebody who knows what's going on, find out if I actually belong there. And in the meantime, I notice that there's like a big long table and there's a bunch of lights. Suddenly guys come in, they turn the lights on, and 4 guys walk past me, and it's the Beatles. And they sit down not 15, 20 feet from me and do a press conference. And I'm going, okay, I can die now. This is it. I don't care what happens now. Anyway, so they do a full press conference. The thing that impressed me was, which I never thought about, is that they wore makeup. They looked like little dolls because they had like tons of makeup on, which never occurred to me that they would do. But I guess, if you're on stage in that kind of light. Anyway, so they're still trying to find somebody who knows what's going on. They can't find anybody. And now I should cut in here at the moment, like a good filmmaker, and say, meanwhile,
back at
my parents have gone to this place called the Brass Rail in Detroit. What my dad knows, but my mom doesn't, is it's a strip club. Right? So he's taking her downstairs. She's seeing all these pictures on the walls of like naked girls. And she's going, what kind of place is this? So he gets her down there. They're going to have dinner. They start bringing out the food. She looks up at the ceiling and happens to notice that the paint on the ceiling is rippling and starts dropping down. The place burns to the ground while they're there. So my dad's like, ushers my
I have to
mom out,
interrupt
and
you
I'll
for
say,
1 second. Were the strippers okay?
well, that's what my dad asked. You know?
Your dad and I had something in
Went
common.
back in to like see if the strippers are okay. My
Do I
mom
need to
was-
grab a couple of strippers on the way out? Sorry. Go back to your story. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Absolutely, that's exactly what happened. So anyway, so my mom was pissed. Anyway, cut back to me. Beatles finished their press conference. They walk past me. The last guy there is John Lennon, and he looks at me with this cop holding my arm. And he goes, "So, son, what are you in for?" You know, and then he takes off. And finally, they find this guy who says, "What's your name?" And I tell him my name, and they go, "No, get him out of here," you know. So he literally, like in the movies, throw me into the street. I'm laying on the concrete, on the pavement, on the outside, and I see the two feet. And I look up, and it's the cop that I went to originally. Yeah. And I figure he's gonna like arrest me or something. But he looks nice, and he just goes, "I guess they didn't believe you, huh?" So he picks me up and says, "Look, if you want to get in there, there's scalpers across the street that are selling the $5.50 tickets for $3.50.
Uh-huh.
This is what a Beatle concert cost back in those days. So
I can't imagine.
I bought tickets, went and saw the Beatles, which was just an amazing. It's still, people don't understand what that was because it has never been captured correctly. It's like, it was just, you could have turned off every light in the place and it would have been as bright as daylight from the flash bulbs, just going like that. And the screams were so loud you couldn't tell what they were singing. It was just, it was insane. Anyway, so I concert's over. I walk outside and I'm standing there waiting for my folks to show up. Well, little do I know that the place is burned to the ground. They can't get back to me. So I'm standing out there. This girl, and there's thousands of girls out there. When this girl comes up to me and says, "You look like you're in a band. Would you mind signing an autograph?" I said, "Well, yeah, I've got a little band." So I signed an autograph. Well, her friend sees her getting an autograph, and so she comes over. And before I know it, it's like I'm pressed against Olympia Stadium, you know, with like, you know, a couple hundred girls, and suddenly this arm comes in the middle and pulls me out. It's the cop from inside who's not in the best mood. And he arrests me for inciting a riot. They take me down to jail in Detroit, in downtown Detroit. This is a very long story. Anyway.
No, I love it. Which I'm sure was a wonderful place to visit, right? Jail. And how old were you? One more time.
Detroit jail. Yeah, it was wonderful.
This is your first time in jail, and how old were you?
I was 17.
So balls of steel. Balls.
Well, I'm sitting there going, "Oh shit!" You know.
No. To fake the thing earlier took balls of steel.
Yeah, exactly.
I did.
So, anyway, so I'm sitting in there, and there's this black guy going, "I'm gonna kill her, man. I'm gonna kill her." You know, okay. And one of the cops actually came up to me while I'm in jail, you know, in the cell, going, "Hey, are you really in a band? Would you sign this for my daughter?" So, you know, finally my parents showed up, and they figured out where I was, and you know, they were not too happy. Last thing I remember, my dad saying, "Yeah, the kid's got to cut his hair," you know, which I didn't.
Yeah. Well, how did they find you? I mean, this is because I think some of our audience skews a little older and then some a little younger. The ones who are a little younger don't understand. There's no cell phones. There's no cell phones. There's no pagers. There's nothing. No. How did they find you in jail?
Well, they found me because they finally did make it back to Olympia Stadium. And at that point, there was just a few, there was just some guys with a dust broom sweeping up. And they said, "Have you seen this kid?" And they said, "What's he look like?" And they said, "We've got," and they said something, the guy said something like, "Was he wearing a wig?" Which made my dad very happy. And he said, "No, he's not wearing a wig." Well, I think they took him down to jail. So, So they
The words every parent wants to hear
about their 17-year-old. Yeah. After the strip club burned down.
It was so funny because it was one of those things that after I told them the story and after what they had been through, I never even got punished for it. They were just like,
yeah, I was about to say, 'cause what a night. Your favorite strip club's gone. Your son's arrested. That's just when you go home, you sleep on, and you wake up the next day and forget.
See, I am not a great filmmaker like yourself, but to me, I would have probably rolled with a comedic. I would have cut to you in the back seat, and there's a stripper on each side, and we cut to your dad, and your dad goes, "Well, they need a ride home, darling. These poor girls.
They're working their way through school.
I'm just saying.
It was definitely a night to remember.
Yeah.
It's funny because I remember the next day I went down to the local radio station, which I was friends with, and they didn't believe a word of it. You know, I said, "Hey, you go, Mom," you know.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So back to it. So we go out. The bands don't work. Oh, you okay?
Just a second. Hello, I'm doing an interview. I will have to call you.
Is it somebody important? Can we say hi? Put them on speakerphone. Put them on speaker. You know what happens sometimes when I teach a class and somebody has their phone goes off, I'll scream out, "Turn off the light and come back to bed." So anyway, so you end up out in LA and you somehow end up working at Don Post Studio. So I'm assuming that you had some special effects mask making experience. Were you a model kit guy or what?
Well,
how did that come about?
Very, very young when I was probably about 11 or 12. I started making. There was a magazine that came out called Fantastic Monsters of the Films, which was by Paul Blaisdell. His magazine, Bob Burns. And he had this section
Bob Burns.
Called Devil's Workshop, and he's explained how to do stuff. So I started very young making masks, and actually, if you hang on 2 seconds.
Sure, go ahead. Well, he's gone. He's never coming back. He's totally left us. Do you see anything that we could reach through the screen and steal? That camera looks mighty expensive. Is that a red?
I was actually,
what?
The House on Hill poster. I've seen the one that doesn't have the $1 million each on the top. And
I don't think mine has the $1 million.
No, that's what I say. I think that's a.
I want to ask him about that when he comes back.
Yeah.
Oh, sexy.
There it is. The first mask I ever made.
That's it? So you've kept it all this time?
Yes, as you can see, it's fallen apart, but it's still sort of there anyway.
So did you?
So that was it was obviously the Mummy from Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, I guess.
Right.
But anyway, so that was I started out by making masks and continued doing that until I got involved in rock and roll. And then when I came back to Los Angeles, I remember actually a friend of mine wanted to do. For Halloween, he wanted to do Pickman's Model from Night Gallery.
Yeah.
So I don't know what possessed me. I said, okay, yeah, let's just make it, and I made the whole costume and everything, and foam rubber, and then just started getting back into it. And
so it was kind of a natural talent, something you already had.
Yeah, well, I'd been when I was really young. Unlike today, you can find any kind of toy you want today. When I was a kid, there weren't any science fiction or horror toys. There was just a handful of things, really. And so I would ask my parents for clay so I could make my toys, because I'd make little Frankenstein labs or the Fly lab or, I even remember borrowing somebody's like a spark coil from a Model A so I could make
yeah.
My model Frankenstein and stuff.
That sounds great. Yeah.
So, but that really served me well because of the fact there weren't any toys like that,
Right.
So, I don't know how many Robbie the Robots I made or Nautiluses from 20,000 Leagues or, a lot of them.
Yeah. So how did you end up at Don Post? Because, well, for some of our audience who don't know, Don Post was like the premier mask place, correct? And they did Halloween masks, costumes. But
the Don Post Studios really started, I think, in the late 40s, and was probably the biggest mask company, certainly in the United States, up until very recently. And how I wound up there really was I had become enamored with Robbie the Robot, and this is after making the masks and stuff, and I wanted to build a replica, so I started working on a replica, and I remember bringing parts down to Don Post Studios, and they said, well, why don't you come and work for us,
So it just happened.
Yeah, and I said, great, because I was unemployed and, borrowing money from my mom and stuff. So, so I got a job there. In fact, I started there at the same day Bob Short started. So we were back in the back room there painting 300-line Frankensteins and so forth. And then slowly I started sculpting stuff for the studio, and ultimately became vice president of Don Post Studios and so forth.
And then you left it to make films.
I left it to make films. I mean, it was really a couple things that were going on. It's, I was becoming sort of toxic from the chemicals. Starting to get like strange rashes and stuff from the chemicals we were using.
Well, that and the STDs.
And what's that?
I said that and the STDs. It was a joke.
Well, there you go. Well, we won't talk about that.
Nah, no. VD, what are you going to do?
Probably a scream.
But anyway, so it was becoming toxic. You were getting sick?
I was getting sick off of it. And then also at the same time, I just really had a desire to make a film. And I thought, well, the time has come. So I left the studio and took my savings and made a little movie called Scared to Death.
With a Sinjinor. Am I saying it correctly?
Sinjinor, yes.
Sinjinor. I'm so sorry. I missed a vowel. Sinjinor. Yes.
Yeah, there's a song that goes, who's creeping under the streets of the city? Everyone knows it's Sinjinor. Okay.
Did you tell a story about the Michael Myers Halloween mask? Were you there when it was?
Well, I made it. I
Right.
sculpted the original, and really what happened was when I was at Don Post Studios, we had a licensing agreement with Universal Pictures, and that was pretty much all that Don made, and I was very concerned about that. I said, if they pull a plug on you, I just have this feeling they're going to pull a plug on you, and you're going to be without any product.
Yeah.
So I said, so we need to start coming up with other licensees and doing some original. So I sculpted Bob Short, and I sculpted a whole bunch of original masks. Plus, we started reaching out to other companies for licenses. One of them, of course, was Star Wars. We got the first license ever on Star Wars.
I don't know that I knew that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of our other things, we had a very good relationship with 20th Century Fox. So we got to license the Planet of the Apes and Star Trek. We actually only wanted Star Trek because we wanted the gore and the monsters.
Right.
And they said, well, we'll give you a license, but you have to make Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. And I went, oh, God, okay.
Well, go ahead. Out of the Boneheads, he's a huge Trekkie, so he got really excited. We all have different things, and the Trekkie isn't to the left of me.
I totally get it, know. So a lot of people love Planet of the Apes,
I love Planet of the Apes, yeah.
But so I got a hold of, I think it was Mike Westmore gave me one of the life casts of Bill Shatner. So I did a clay press and basically sculpted the Michael Myers from that. And it was in my time there, it was a very minor blip, and
you had no idea.
I had no idea. And then I remember John Carpenter came in one day and with an entourage, and they were looking for a mask, and they wanted Captain Kirk painted white and the hairspray painted black. It is black, contrary to popular belief. If you look in the movie, it's mostly black, and towards the end it becomes sort of brown, because what they did is in a hurry they just spray painted the the hair black with black lacquer. Black lacquer doesn't stay in very long. So
Yeah. So it just started coming out, and that's the reason why.
coming out. But if you really look at the movie, it's black.
Yeah.
Know? Anyway, so that was really the whole genesis of it, and to this day I'm haunted. I go places, and there's, oh my God, it's Michael Myers. Oh no, it's Captain Kirk.
But you have no idea. That's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Right, Mick Strawn is a production designer, and I have no idea if you know him or not. But he worked on a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street, Critters 2. He worked with Mick Garris quite a bit, and he's been on our show 2 or 3 times. And he's a friend of ours. Well, we're friendly, and he talks about all the shit that you just threw out that would be worth a fortune today. Now that he's kind of semi-retired, that he could just sell on eBay.
Well, at one time, when the Carpenter came in and had the Halloween mask, I had the paint department make the next one off the line an exact replica, which I took home and I had for years and years. And then when they done, Junior begged to have it back to borrow for something. He said, "You absolutely give it back to me." And of course, I never saw it again. So.
What a rat bastard.
You probably sold it.
I'm sure, yeah, absolutely.
I was say it's somewhere in a glass case now on some collector.
Yes, good. On the black market. So you did Scared to Death. Did you was it completely independent? You went out and raised the money?
Yeah, I mortgaged my house, and I had another investor who put in like another 10 grand. 2 investors actually put in 10,000 each, and then we went off and made the movie. And I think the whole movie cost $74,000. And it was no one was more surprised than I was when it made number 16 on the charts. So,
well, that was great for such a small film, though. It's
fantastic.
fantastic.
It was great. Yeah, we made our money back and we made a little profit, and it was amazing. So yeah.
Yeah. So why was it so long between that and do you want to call it Titanfine? Do you want to call it Creature?
Whatever. I mean, it was shot in Titanfine was the original title, but actually I objected to the title only with the distributing company because to me the Creature is the creature from the Black Lagoon, and it annoyed me to have a movie called Creature.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I understand they just were doing it for because they thought it was a more alien creature.
Right.
I get it, but. It was such a long time because actually, and even to this day, I've really never been connected heavily with the powers in Hollywood. I was never one of the in crowd. And so it was, really it was a long time between Scared to Death. And then in the meantime, I was like shooting video camera for Disney Cable and things like that, doing cooking shows.
Uh-huh. Which I'm sure that came with a lot of training too, though. That made you even better. You had to work on the fly for TV. I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. No, it was good, And then a friend of mine called me up and said he knew some crazed Israeli who wanted to make a movie like Alien, and I said, well, I think I can do that. So I met with him, and I painted a little picture. I always thought it was good to have the show and tell, so I painted a little piece of artwork, and I took it into him. I said, well, and I said, this is what it's about, and here's how you're going to sell it. And he went, okay, great, let's make it. So we started production on that. That was we were making it in summer of 1984.
Yeah.
Which was the hottest summer in history, I think, in Los Angeles. And, so we were all dying making it with people in space and all this stuff. But, so we made that. And that film did really well. I mean, it made number 8 in the charts. And actually, it was probably really huge because the per-screen average was incredible. And to this day, I don't know how much money it made, but it made a lot of money. So.
Oh, I'm sure you got ripped off. I don't even need to ask.
No, I never saw it. I didn't see it.
I'm sure you got ripped off. I mean, but you did get to work with Klaus Kinski. Do you want to talk about it? I know you probably get asked about that a lot, but it's not every day I get to talk to somebody who worked with the crazy son of a bitch.
You're being kind.
Well, I would love to meet Werner Herzog, and and I know he probably gets ad nauseum and has no desire to talk about it, but how did you do it? How did you get through the day? Because I love the idea of Werner being behind the camera holding a pistol, because I know that's one of those supposedly.
I remember at one point I said, I know Herzog pulled a gun on you. I said, if you don't shape up, I'm going to pull a gun on you. So,
yeah. Although I've seen Werner deny it, but everyone says it's true. So I want to live in a world where it is true, where the director has a gun pointed at his star. But
I wouldn't doubt it, really.
Yeah.
But
so
no,
anyway.
I mean, Klaus, once again, this crazed Israeli, 2 weeks before shooting said, "Oh, by the way, I hired Klaus Kinski to be in your movie." Now, I had heard the rumors already that he was like a madman.
Uh-huh.
So, and I said, Moshe, I said, there's no part for Klaus in the movie. Make a part for him. So I quickly wrote a part for him, and I thought, well, if he's crazy, I might as well write him in as this crazy guy. So I wrote him as a sort of madman, and of course he showed up, and he was 10 times crazier than the part I wrote. And the first words to me, we were walking out on the spaceship set, and he put his arm around me. He goes, "Bill, when Natasha was 12, I raped her." And my brain must have just spun in my head. I didn't even know where to go from there, and then things went downhill from there. I mean, Klaus was a despicable human being. He really was. And I mean, I'll give you an example. First of all, he'd want to have an argument between every take, every time the camera shut off. And I was just telling him, I said, we're just going to go from one take to the next. I don't even turn the camera off, just roll it, because otherwise we'd be dead. But I mean, one time we were having a luncheon just during shooting, and we were at this fairly shishi place in Beverly Hills. And Klaus showed up, and he had a girl that I swear if she was 15, I'd be surprised, And she went up to go to the restroom, and I said, "Klaus, where did you get her?" He goes, "Oh, I hang her on the schoolyards." And I went, "Oh, man." And I knew the way he said it, he was telling me the truth,
Our producer, our director producer Haley just did this and behind the camera and leaned over. I wish you could have seen it. We're educating her as we go. I will make sure to show you Fitzcarraldo and let's see, Geary, Wrath of God. We'll watch
Geary,
some.
Yeah. No, look, he when he was on camera, he lit up the screen. There's no question.
Right. He's a presence.
But Klaus is dead now, and the world's a better place for him.
But yeah, he's just a horrible human being. Imagine him being alive in today's time. With specifically of all the things that happened in the last 6 months, with all the things that came out. Imagine the crap that would come out about him.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you just, I'm surprised he wasn't arrested even back then. I mean, the stuff he was up to. So.
Yeah. All right. So, after that, was it Freddy's Nightmares, or you started working in television quite a bit?
I once again, not being very well connected, and I really, looking back on it, I mean, I should have just been launched into, filmmaking, because the Creature did really, really well, but not being well connected, as I said, I just. Kicked around, studied film at UCLA, and wound up meeting a guy who wound up working on a show called Freddy's Nightmares. And he called me up and he said, "You're the guy who should be doing this." And so I went down there and started directing those, they ran at like 2:00 in the morning or something. And they were hour shows shot in about 4.5 to 5 days. So that was just a brutal schedule. But I really enjoyed it because it was so, you had to be so fast on your feet that it really, made you very, very keen on getting things together and being really ripe for that sort of thing. So it really was a good thing. And the producers didn't care about the show. All they wanted to know is that you came in on time and on budget, so you could do anything you wanted to do. So I pulled out every harebrained idea that I had and tried it out on Freddy's Nightmares. But it was great. So
So I'm curious, you went to film school after you did Creature?
Yeah, mainly because
Usually
I
they
felt,
go. Usually what I've heard is that you go to film school, and then you go out and make the movie.
yeah, I
Now,
did it as
we're
backwards.
rejects. We both work at the University of Kentucky, but we both would have liked to have went to film school. Didn't happen. However, usually you go there and then make the movie. Now, explain that to me. I've got to stop you. You've got to explain that.
Well, basically, I felt like I knew cinematography and art direction and that stuff.
Yeah,
But I really felt that I needed more tools to work with actors and so forth.
that
So
makes sense.
that was really the main reason that I went.
Hmm.
So I took a lot of classes in directing from guys like Ted Post and um, Gil Cates, who was later the president of the Directors Guild.
Okay.
It's great classes, and really I learned a lot from that. And it's funny, when I started out, my goals changed drastically. I started out, all I wanted to do when I started was just, if I could make a monster movie once a year, I'd be happy. Well, of course, that you can't do that anyway, because there's never enough money to do that.
Yeah.
But then later on, I sort of became more and more enamored with guys like F.W. Murnau
Uh-huh.
and really the fine art of filmmaking. And so I really wanted to sort of head in that direction. And so that's really where things went, and I did, like I said, Freddy's Nightmares. Then I got a chance to do a show called Dark Justice, which we called Just Darkness. Again, it was an hour show, action show shot in 4.5, 5 days.
Yeah.
Some episodes were 4.5, some were 5. Anyway, so that was good. I worked with Bruce Abbott on that show.
I saw that. I saw that Bruce Abbott was in from Reanimator. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I felt sorry for Bruce because he's a really excellent actor, and if he got anywhere near the lines, we just go cut, print, moving on.
Right.
But it was a good experience. And then on that show, there was on Freddy's, actually, there was a guy named Gil Adler who later went on to produce
Tales from the
Tales from the Crypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so some was now 3 years later, I bumped into Gil, and he'd been on Crypt for, I don't know, 4, 5 seasons. And he invited me to come and do an episode, and they sent me a script called Only Skin Deep.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, I had been studying so hard, I felt like I was a racehorse that was like out in the pasture somewhere, And they gave me the script, and I was just like from God. I read the script, and I said, oh, God, this is like the perfect script for me. I know exactly how to do this. So I did this episode and turned in the show, and I got this call from Joel Silver screaming at me to come into the office. So I figured that I was in deep shit and they were going to fire me. And then he went off on me, and apparently he went off on me in a good way. He said that, it was the best show, and Bob Zemeckis said it's the best Crypt episode ever done. And I went, thank God, So, and suddenly I had agents coming out of my butt, and it was.
But so it wasn't until you did Only Skin Deep, though, that you got a lot of recognition. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was the sort of thing that sort of propelled me into, doing bigger things.
When we were preparing for this, because we're fans, and we'll get to the House on Haunted Hill later on, but I rewatched both of the Crypt episodes. I hadn't seen them in a long time, and it had been a really long time, to be quite honest. And I realized most of what I would see later on, your visuals are there. That the shaky kind of, I don't know what you call that.
Yeah, that was when I was still starting to experiment with it. In fact, I'd done tests maybe a couple of years earlier with a friend of mine at my house, and I'd set up lights, and we were shooting variable frame rates and stuff like that because I wanted to experiment with it.
So a lot of the cool shots, the leading up to the bed at low angles, all that, I mean, things that we would see later, it was right there, and then it was also in the next episode as well. Even more so, which was shot in England, correct? The whole season was done in England?
Right, and then that's when I started experimenting with the idea that if somebody did their action super slow and then we shot it at like 4 frames a second, that it would be an interesting thing, which is one of the things I used in the episode in England.
Is it From the
So,
Grave? Yeah.
Report from the Grave,
Yeah.
yeah, which wasn't really a good show. It had problems, and I really have to take responsibility for that. It was because I had written the script, excuse me, that was basically a feature film, and it just trying to chop it down into a half hour just didn't work. So
Yeah. Dick Beebe wrote the other one, correct?
correct.
And is that how you both ended up working on House on Haunted Hill?
Well, yes, yeah. Later on, a few years later, after I did another thing for a couple other things for the Dark Castle gang, basically before they became Dark Castle.
Yeah.
Is they asked me they wanted me to develop House on Haunted Hill as a feature film, and they asked me if I was be interested. I said yes. I think ghosts are going to come back really hot and heavy, and I said I want to make the first ghost movie.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, who do you want to write it? And I said, well, why don't we get Dick Beebe, because he did a really good job on my Crypt episode. So that was good and bad. Dick unfortunately had a little problem with the drink.
But he's in the movie though, correct? He's in the opening scene with the pencil sharpening, correct?
Yeah, he's the guy who gets the pencils through the neck.
Yeah.
But Dick spent probably about 4 months writing a screenplay, and we actually everyone after we read it said he wrote this like last night.
Yeah.
Because that's how it looked. It just was not good. Nobody liked it. The studio was going to pull the plug, and I told him, I said, look, give me a chance to work with Dick. And so I got Dick, and I said, let's watch the original movie again. Let's watch the Vincent Price movie and write down everything we like about that movie, and let's put it in the script. And that's what we did. So I said, we'll try and figure out a way of making it our own, but let's keep as much of the original as possible.
So did you sober him up, or just kind of watch over him as you went through the process?
Yeah, I just watched over him, and and he was sort of at that point. I was like on him all the time, so he had much chance to. And also, I wrote half the script. I mean, I didn't get credit for it, but I basically assembled the plot, and I wrote all the scary scenes, and Dick wrote sequences that were basically a lot of the character stuff. The interaction between the Vincent Price character and his wife, Evelyn, and so I wrote that. I wrote the opening sequence and the stuff with the roller coaster. That's all. Actually, the roller coaster stuff is from when I worked at Downpost Studios. I used to go to we used to go to amusement parks because we sold a lot of masks to amusement parks. And I remember seeing the rise and like, these aren't scary. They should be the imminent threat of death. So that was my idea for the theme park. So I actually had a couple other. There was the roller coaster, which is the one you saw in the movie. But I also developed a thing called Walk the Plank, which was a ride where you had to walk out on the plank. It was like 100 feet across and like this narrow, and all that was below you was just a big black chasm. And what it was like 200 feet tall, and it was a giant funnel. And basically, at some point, they would throw the thing, and you'd go off, and basically you'd fall free flight, and then slowly hit the side. And it would be so gradual that eventually you'd just come out the other end.
No, I'm never riding anything you design.
I'm good.
That's the 2 out of the 3 boneheads are scared shitless of roller coasters. The 2 here, the third, the idiot who would ride that, is sick tonight. So sorry.
It was weird is that when we made that movie, right out our window we could see Six Flags. Right?
Yes.
And they wouldn't let us shoot the roller coaster scene there because they didn't want to portray roller coasters that way. We had to fly all the way to Universal in Florida.
Oh, really?
Universal Studios was the only place that would let us do that.
Is that the Hulk ride at Universal?
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but now that you said Universal, that looks like the Hulk ride. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually I think probably for a couple of years afterwards, they still had the prop stuff that we left there from the.
That's great. So you wrote a lot of it. Once again, actually, when you were telling me that, I was thinking about the screenwriting guild, and oh, look at me, I wrote 49% of a movie that I'll never get credit for, right?
Well, actually, I probably wrote more than that. I probably could have filed a thing with the Writers Guild, but I was trying to be a team player, and I figured if they took my name off of it, that it was probably because of some deal that they had made, and and I didn't want to get in the middle of it. I said, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So,
so why didn't you do 13?
But if you find early copies, you'll find early copies on the internet of the film pretty much the way it is. It's got my name on it, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. By the way, James, when you got up to leave earlier, James, and you actually signed my House on Haunted Hill poster, but mine doesn't have the $1 million each on it.
Yeah, I was wondering. I don't think anybody won that. I think that was a scam.
Oh, I'm sure I'm sure it was. But so how many of those were actually made? As opposed to, I was wondering when you came to, because as you can see, I collect one sheets. I have over 300 or 400. So I was kind of curious.
Yeah, I guess this is the standard one, the one I've got in the back.
Oh,
but I have the one that's got the $1 million poster thing. I think they probably only made maybe a couple hundred of those.
Yeah,
that was like an early release poster.
Yeah. Okay. Well, remind me, and I'll steal that sometime eventually. I'm joking. So, why didn't you direct 13 Ghosts? Because that House on Haunted Hill is that your biggest hit?
Yeah, I mean that was financially that certainly was my biggest hit.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure what Creature did.
Yeah.
Creature, like I say, was very successful, but I mean it had the same screen average as Star Wars, so I don't know how much money they made, but
yeah.
Once
again, you didn't see any of it, right?
Anyway, so that movie, I think it did 40 million in the U.S. I think it did like 120 worldwide, all total. So something like that.
So it's a big hit. So I would imagine they wanted you back for 13 Ghosts, the next Dark Castle film.
That was because,
I know the answer to this, by the way. I know he told me the answer to this 2 years ago. You don't remember telling me the answer, but I'm putting you on the spot.
It's so egregious that making a House on Haunted Hill was such a difficult thing.
Yeah.
And working a certain person who'll go unnamed.
So you don't want me to say it?
But his initials are Joel Silver.
Right. And Cece told me a story about the Wachowskis actually moving the production of the Matrix sequels out of the country. So they wouldn't have to deal with Joel.
Actually, I know they had a guy his entire job was just to keep Joel away from him. So.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that he's that huge of a bastard. I've never met him, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he's not known as being. I think he actually revels in being a bad guy. So there you go.
He wouldn't be the only one, right? Of famous Hollywood producers who revel in being the bad guy. That's a long list. That's a stereotypical list, right? Okay. So how did you end up doing Fear.com?
Well, once again, Moshe from Creature called me up and said, I want to make a movie. We're going to shoot in Luxembourg. It'll be just like New York.
I'll keep that in mind for my vacation.
It was the same producer on Fear.com. I didn't know that. I must have missed that when I was researching. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah.
I usually catch that stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, so he had this idea for a story that he wanted to do, which was about a ghost inhabiting a computer. And I thought, well, okay, that's an interesting idea. Unfortunately, what happened with Fear.com was sometimes, when you make a movie, wonderful things happen. Like everything falls in place. That's happened to me a couple times. One was on the Tales from the Crypt episode, and then one was on Masters of Horror. But sometimes the opposite happens, and unfortunately, Fear.com was a case of all the forces of. Yeah, there you go.
We'll talk. We're going to get to it. I promise. Unless you're in a hurry, we're going to get to it.
All the forces conspiring against that film.
Yeah.
And one of them, which was the Screen Actors Guild, was going to have a strike.
Yeah.
And that forced the production into overdrive to get it done before the Screen Actors Guild went on strike.
Uh-huh.
And it was a huge mistake. And actually, at times, I thought of quitting the production before the film got made.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not in my nature to be a quitter. And I should have been, because it actually was not boding well, because we didn't have the time to properly do the screenplay.
Yeah.
And there was just a lot of elements that I just felt like, that just weren't falling into place. That said, I got one of the best DPs, I think, that ever, walked the planet in modern times. And the film has gotten a reputation. There was one website that was a cinematography website called it the most beautiful film shot in recent history.
I totally agree. And the one compliment I want to give you, and I think it's nothing against you. Stephen Dorff may be a wonderful human being. I've never met the man, but I don't know what it is about Stephen Dorff that they make fun of me all the time. It's like Dave Coulier and Stephen Dorff could fall off the planet tomorrow, and I like most people, and I've never met Stephen Dorff. So you can tell me he's a horrible person, which would just reinforce what I already...
Actually, Stephen's a nice guy.
See, so damn it, I just don't like a guy for no reason.
And you should like him from the movie he did in Canada when he was a kid. What's the name of it?
No, I don't know. I don't even like him in Blade. I don't know why. I can't tell you.
He's the little kid in Get the Gate.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway, back to what I was saying. You do have Stephen Ray in there, and I'm a big fan of Stephen Ray. And what you're going to tell me is that Stephen Ray's the dick.
Stephen Ray is a lovely guy.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah, and we used to have very, very interesting conversations because he's very IRA. I don't know if you know.
Irish Republican Army,
yeah. He's very much pro IRA.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, and we used to have really because I don't really have a perspective on it one way or another. So we used to have some really interesting. And I'm a big collector of British cars, and of course, one of the marks that I like is I like old Rolls Royces, the old ones. The new ones I don't care about. But we had a big conversation about, how that was the epitome of, British imperialism. And I said, well, who do you think makes these? Working class guys make these cars. It's not like, you don't see any lords or ladies making those cars.
Oddly enough, I didn't have an opinion about that too. Our boss is Irish and has taught me a lot of it. I mean, she's off the boat, immigrated here. But anyway, back to Fear.com is probably one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. Straight up, I thought that because I saw it in the theater because we are fans, and I thought I don't know that it works for me, but it is a beautiful, beautiful movie.
Well,
every frame of it. Every frame.
Tell Christian Sabalt that because Christian and I worked very hard on that film in terms of trying to make it something unique and something. So.
We would love to have him on the show. That would be great.
I'm sure he'd be happy to talk about it. Because,
we love talking to production people. Of course, we'd also like to have Jeffrey Combs, but he's a B-movie huge person, so they don't always want to come on our little shitty YouTube podcast show. But no, it's a beautiful film. Every frame of it is just beautiful.
Yeah, he did an amazing job with it, and we worked very hard together on that to make it. So Christian, I really think the world of him for a number of reasons. First of all, he's a great artist, but we have a really interesting relationship, which is that like if I go on the set and go, Christian, we really need that 10K. Can we turn that one off? He'll go, okay, and he'll turn it off, and then he'll come to me while we're shooting and go, I think that performance was good, And I go, Christian, you're right. Let's, so we have a really
that's great
interesting give and take on it, which, it's hard to find in somebody, So.
Yeah.
He doesn't get offended if I say something about some framing or something that he's doing.
So and this may be it's a kind of a two-parter, and I feel like I've taken everything from James, but. Why do you think you weren't a Hollywood inside guy? Are you not a party goer or just not out and about or mingling?
I've never been good at hanging out, I've actually just been too much into just working on stuff, and doing experiments. And most of my time's taken up with experimenting with, even to this day, I just went out and bought myself a proper cinema camera, so I can shoot some more tests and stuff. It's just what I do. And it takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of time to do that stuff. So it's, I always feel like people are just sitting around, having lunch, which is probably what I should be doing, but.
Yeah, right. So the next thing, was it Parasomnia? That was the next movie?
The next thing really was Masters of Horror.
Okay, so let's talk about this because
I was writing. I should preface that I was writing Parasomnia while I was making Masters of Horror.
This is one of my favorite. I think we both. I actually didn't ask James. This is one of our favorite Masters of Horror. And it's the reason why I had like the House on Haunted Hill, but I actually decided to pull this out to show you. And not only that, it may be my favorite thing you've done.
Oh, thank you.
And it's just because I just think it works on every level. Specifically now.
I have Mick Garris to thank for the fact that he, had me on the show, but also that he set up a situation where the directors could do what they wanted to do. Because most of the time, you don't get to do what you want to do. You do what's convenient or what's going to make the money guys happy or whatever.
Right.
And that wasn't the case with the show. The directors had the opportunity to shoot whatever they wanted to shoot, as long as they once again came on time on a budget. So it was a great opportunity, and Mick made that possible. So.
Yeah. Well, you can go ahead and get him to do Bonehead. That'd be great. He has told me no.
But
he was not. But by the way, I appreciate him being honest and telling me no, as opposed to ignoring me. I like the no better than ignoring me.
Here's one of the reasons I'm not. That I didn't have a more industrious career is because I was stupid. I didn't realize you're supposed to tell everybody yes. And
right.
Then just not do it.
And just not do it? Yeah.
Which apparently is what you're supposed to do.
And that happened.
Safety tip to filmmakers in the future, just say yes. Whatever they want you to do, just say yes. And then just go do what you want to do.
I've heard that before. Or if you're doing small shows, we have been told yes by people and they just not return our messages or phone calls or anything. So, but we've gotten used to it. Anyway, really quick, this Cigarette Burns and
Pick Me Up?
Pick Me Up's good, but I like Incident on and Off a Mountain Road, which is...
That's very good. I also like Stuart Gordon's second, the Poe one.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, with Jeffrey Combs.
I love that one.
James, we're both...
I think Stuart was really, really excellent.
Yeah, that one's good too. You're absolutely right.
Well, I was about to say, and I think one thing about Masters of Horror, and I'm glad to know that it came out of you being able to do what you want, because to me... that was the last of event TV. Like when that show was on, I
paid for Stars. Everybody came to my apartment to watch
Showtime?
it. No, it was Stars, or was it Showtime? I guess it was Showtime.
Showtime.
I'm sorry, I said Stars.
Yeah.
I paid for it because everybody came to. Of course, this how your friends are, right? There's one that pays for everything, and everyone else shows up. I'm the fat bastard who's paying for everything.
I didn't want you to be alone.
And everybody came to my apartment to watch it.
But I mean, it was event TV. It was like you got your own movie.
Yeah.
Every Sunday night or whenever it was on.
Yeah.
And I mean, we watched it because it wasn't going to be the same thing we saw 15 times. It wasn't going to be, this is going to be the same vision of this. It's not going to be the same characters. But you're going to walk away going, oh, okay. Yeah, this is different. This was good.
Well, I loved it because it was an anthology. Because it's like, that means that each show is unique. And and because the directors got to do whatever they want. If you really want to know what a director's sensibilities are, there it is.
Yeah, because I think it encapsulates everything that I'd seen you would done up to that point. It has your visual style, and because you have a beautiful visual style, it has your eye, it has your sensibilities, it has, I can look at that and say, yep, there's Bill Malone. William Malone directed that, right? I can say, oh, John Carpenter, that talking rat is Stuart Gordon. I think it's in the first one, right?
It's in the first
season. That's Stuart Gordon. Yeah, I totally understand. It's sad that they ended up going for the third season and became Fear Itself on NBC, and of course that I have no idea who thought that was a good idea.
Well, look, I think it was just a way of keeping the show alive. I think Mick didn't really have any choice.
Yeah.
What happened is right at that time, Showtime changed hands.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's what killed the show, because the next people who came in didn't want to have anything to do with it. So
yeah.
But I think it left kind of a permanent mark, because there were the unofficial, not really spin-offs, but there were the Masters of Science Fiction for a while that adapted some Harlan Ellison, and I think Stephen Hawking actually was the quote-unquote host of an episode, and so but the impact that it still has, and I can pick these up and I can show them to people, and they're like, oh, this is great, where did this come from? And I'm like, oh, it's a show.
Yeah.
And so I just absolutely adored Masters of Horror.
We probably should stop kissing your ass about Masters of Horror and move on. I'd talk about Parasomnia. How did that come about? Because you financed it yourself. Once again, sir, balls of steel. And you don't remember telling me this, but when you were there showing it, it was a pack that weekend because Clive Barker was there and there was some other people.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was sick. If we ever talk again, let me tell you a Clive Barker story. Are you friendly with him? Do you know him at all?
Yeah, actually, no Clive.
Okay, my wife. I'll tell you a story about my wife telling him a dirty joke later, and him laughing his ass off. And he was so sick that weekend. I don't even know why he was there.
I remember I ran into him in the elevator, and he was so sick he was like keeled over practically. So.
Yeah, he was bad. And there was somebody in front of us, even though he was so sick. Someone in front of us had a bust of Pinhead, and he actually got up and started taking his pants down, pantomiming Pinhead blowing him in front of the rest of the audience. But he was a blast. Anyway, you were telling me that you basically took a mortgage out on your house, right, to do Parasomnia?
I did, actually. In fact, I just paid it off last month.
We'll get to Robbie in a minute. I can see the connections.
Paid off Parasomnia.
Yeah. So,
look, I've never been afraid to fail. I think that if you, and Parasomnia was not a failure, but and financially it was not a success. But to me, you're not doing your best work unless you're like right on the edge of disaster.
Yeah.
I think that's how you have to look at it. So, and I've never been afraid of risking stuff to do things that I like. And Parasomnia was just a project that I really wanted to do because I really felt that it was a kind of movie that audience hadn't seen for me. And I thought it was something that I wanted to show and just say, this is more of, what I'm doing. So, I mortgaged my house and got and a friend of mine had been bugging me for a long time to put money into a movie. And I'm sure he regretted it. but I'm really glad I made Parasomnia, and I'm very proud of it, actually. So
it's once again a beautiful film. But I think it just is another one of those of finding its audience, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that probably, nothing bad about the cast. I think we had a wonderful cast, but I think that I had major stars in it, and a studio releasing, I think it would have been a big hit.
Yeah.
And also it came out exactly at the wrong time because it was at a time when the business was changing drastically. And when we started making the movie, the common belief was if you made a movie for under $1 million, you pretty much were guaranteed that you'd make your money back.
On DVD sales?
Back and make a small profit. Well, during the time that it took to make the movie, which was 2.5 years, we spent like 1.5 years doing the visual effects.
Uh-huh.
And
you did a lot of them, right? you,
that?
you did a lot of those visual effects, correct?
I did about half of the shots,
Yeah.
And during that time, the business completely changed, whereas by the time we got done, nobody give any movies advances. They wouldn't even, the thing which I think unfortunately still holds up today is just give us your movie. No, we're not going to give you any money back. Just give it to us.
Yeah. Right.
In fact, I had a distributor tell me basically that, and I said, "I'll tell you what, let's go down to the Rolls-Royce dealer. If he'll give me the Rolls-Royce with the same idea, I'm good."
Yeah, absolutely. Because the business has changed so much. I've heard Joe Dante talk about this. It's not. They used to pay you to develop things.
Right.
Right. You can make a lot of money. I interviewed Romero a few years ago. I moderate conventions, and he was on a panel. He was talking to me. He made more money when he wasn't making movies in the late 80s and the 90s.
I spent 5 years doing development at Hemdale.
Yeah.
We used to call it Hemlock.
Uh-huh.
Because they pay you, but nothing ever got made.
Right. But he was talking about he made more money then than he ever did in any other time of his career, and he didn't make any movies. It was just from development deals. Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing that I don't think people understand when it comes to actually how film works in the business. And had DVD kind of died by the time Parasomnia came out?
Yeah, that was starting to wane, and then all the other markets were drying up, and nobody was paying for anything. And also, what happened was, the distributor, in their infinite wisdom, the first place they distributed the film to was Brazil, which was an incredibly stupid mistake because the next day it was on the internet.
Yeah.
For free. So why is anybody going to pay for it?
Right.
And there was a website. I don't know if it's around anymore, but there was a website that sort of tracked how many times movies have been downloaded.
Mm-hmm.
It was like Parasomnia had been downloaded 450,000 times. Now, if I had gotten, a couple dollars for every one of those downloads,
you would have been in the black, sir, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go.
I know. I understand.
It was actually successful. It just wasn't financially successful.
Well, you're not the only one with that same story. There's several bigger. Hollywood's lost a lot of money. So you also wrote a couple of films, and if you don't mind me asking about them, Supernova. How were you involved in that?
Well, Supernova was really originally called Dead Star, and it was a H.R. Giger vehicle.
Yeah.
And the premise of it really was that there was a black hole. It was basically the pitch for it was dead calm set in space.
Okay.
So that was really what it was, and the boat was a spaceship, and it was sitting on the edge of a black hole, ready to get sucked in.
Yeah.
And they see this ship coming towards our rescue vehicle.
Yeah.
And on board is this crazy guy who's got some artifact from Alien Artifact, and it opens up a portal to basically hell. And,
so Event Horizon's similar to that, right?
Event Horizon's lifted mercilessly from it. Because the script was actually out for a long time, and I know that it got, everyone read it. And there was a lot of people who wanted to make Dead Star, but it just didn't happen. So that script was kicking around for 10 years.
Oh,
yeah. And it had a lot of good reads. A lot of people wanted to make it, and by the time they got around to making whatever it's called,
Supernova.
Supernova.
Yeah.
Yes. By the time they got around to making Supernova, that script had been mined mercilessly. So.
Yeah, it's not I was wondering how much difference there was. So so how close were you to Giger? Did you work with Giger quite a bit?
Oh yeah, Giger and I were fairly tight. I mean, I spent a couple weeks in Zurich working with him on.
Oh yeah. Do you have a good story?
That was great. Yeah, and he was a genius, and he would start drawings, and he had this pad, and he just keep going, and he'd do more, and I'd have to go stop there, because he'd have some great idea, and but he'd be 5 pages all the way down by the time you could put your finger,
Uh-huh.
So he was great, and I remember walking around his place. He had a flat. It was basically 2 flats that he'd taken the wall out, and all the walls were painted black. and he had all of his paintings. He didn't sell his paintings. He kept all his paintings, and he had the walls are about 3 or 4 feet thick of just his paintings stacked up against the wall. And I remember walking by one of them, which was this painting of Lee, his former girlfriend, and which was one of those weird,
right,
typical Giger paintings, and I noticed some holes in it. I said, Giger, somebody damaged your painting here, and he goes, oh no, that's how my girlfriend, she blew her plans out. And it was true. She shot herself in front of the painting, and he left the bullet holes and the blood on the paintings as part of the.
That's a terrible but yet fascinating story.
Yeah, he was just a really interesting character. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a huge Alien fan, correct?
I am. Yeah, I was enamored with Giger before Alien because I was at a science fiction convention. This is probably about 1975.
Yeah.
And I came across a book on a table called the Necronomicon.
Right.
And I saw this, maybe 76, and I came across that, and I just said, I gotta have this, and I remember going home, just laying on the floor, just pouring through this, going, this is insane. I love this stuff.
It sounds like Dan O'Bannon's story about finding him and then bringing him, later on, right?
I mean, you saw his stuff, and you go, God, this is great. So.
By the way, he was at a science fiction convention in '75. He's just as nerdy as we are.
Oh yeah.
Just as nerdy as we are.
Oh. Probably more so.
So what other projects do you have? Do you have anything coming up? Anything you're working on?
Well, I'm working on a couple different projects. And there is certain interest in The Mirror, which is a Giger project, which I've had for a long time.
Yeah.
And that we'll be hearing about fairly soon. And in the meantime, I'm working on a couple other things. I've got... some things I really can't talk about.
I understand.
Yeah, particularly after Event Horizon.
I don't blame you. I think you should kick Paul Anderson. It's Paul Anderson, right? Paul Thomas, or not P.T. Anderson, but Paul Anderson.
W.S.
Paul W.S. Anderson. Resident Evil Paul Anderson. You should kick his ass. We'll find him and we'll do that for you. But I don't. Do you have any more questions? Because I want to end on Robbie, if that's okay.
Yeah, actually, I think that, and that's actually one thing I wanted to say. Forbidden Planet, big fan, all of that. So I as I read about your fandom of that, I was like, oh, a fellow fan of just classic science fiction.
But you were the biggest fan because you owned it.
I love This Island Earth and
right.
Forbidden Planet and War of the Worlds and all that stuff. I actually, most people don't realize, other than Robbie, at one time I had the world's largest collection on Forbidden Planet. I had virtually everything that there was left on it except for the miniature spaceship and the 7-foot spaceship. So I had everything else. I had all the remaining wardrobe and props and stuff. And
so, did you have to fight Bob Burns for all that? We've met Bob before. He's let us touch the King Kong armature. So
Bob never collected Forbidden Planet. I gave him some stuff. Yeah, Bob's got an amazing collection.
He's got an amazing collection. Yeah, it was kind of. We'll explain that to our fans later on who he is, and he's an interesting guy. But keep going.
So anyway, but Forbidden Planet, was very important to me as a kid. And when I came out to California, I just started coming across stuff, and I started just collecting it, just saying this stuff is too good to wind up in the junkyard. And in fact, some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff I got from MGM. The day I was getting it from the studio, first thing I asked about was the globe with the spaceship. And they said, "Oh yeah, that was bulldozed yesterday." So
they just didn't care, and
didn't care. So stuff was getting thrown out. So I bought a room full of stuff from MGM.
And so this had been in the 70s. So real estate was started probably. It was too expensive to hold on to the real estate, right? The back lot was gone.
Well, they needed a place to put the UA building, and I guess to them it was just old junk, so they had the MGM auction, and then even afterwards they had so much stuff that they had to just start bulldozing stuff. So, and unfortunately they thought Forbidden Planet stuff was the bulldoze stuff. So,
which makes
I was fortunate enough to be there saying, no, I'm taking this home. So
yeah, that's what doesn't make any sense, because I would feel even at that time that people should have known then, at least. Like, if it had been 2 years after Forbidden Planet came out, it kind of makes more sense to me, but we're talking 20 years.
It's just old junk to them.
Yeah. So how did you get Robbie?
Well, Robbie, actually, I got separately. I got, because there was a guy who bought a whole bunch of stuff from MGM called Jimmy Brucker, and he had a place called Movie World down in Buena Park. And he opened up basically a museum where he showed a lot of the stuff that he'd collected.
Yeah.
And one day I get a call, and Robbie was down there. They gave, basically, the studio gave him Robbie because he'd bought so much stuff. And once again, they just thought, well, we'll just get rid of it. They didn't have it at the auction because they felt they were going to maybe do something with Robbie, and then later on they changed their mind and just decided to give it to this guy. And he had it down there for 10 years, and then finally he decided to close the doors down there. And a friend of mine called me up and said, you better get down here because they're selling everything in the place, including Robbie. And I'm sure I was in the car before the phone dropped.
Of course, right? Here's my check. Take all my money. So did you get the Jeep then and all the rest of the extra parts? Did he have all that stuff?
Yeah, what happened was I bought Robbie. Actually, initially I wasn't that interested in getting the Jeep, only because I didn't have a place for it. But the guys down there said, you want the robot, you take the car. So I said, okay, fine.
But they did you a favor.
They did me a favor because, in retrospect, and even I probably 6 months later after I got Robbie, I said, oh yeah, this is totally cool. So
yeah,
and then they brought me the head. They finally found the Twilight Zone head, and they brought that over and stuff. So basically, the shipping cases which he came with, and his control panel and all of that stuff. So it was good. And the shipping cases was the gold, because in there were tons of spare parts, new old stock, as they say in the car business, and NOS parts. Yeah. So it was loaded with that kind of stuff, and it was a blessing.
So after owning him for 40 years, and this is probably one of those interview questions that I always hate, but I'm going to ask something similar to it. I mean, I don't know how you let it go. As someone, I don't have anything, and if you could look through my house, I've been collecting for 20 years myself. Since I was right before I probably started college, I worked my way through school, and I had extra money. I bought things, right? So it's hard for me to imagine getting rid of any of this, much less having that.
Well, it was not an easy decision. Something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I thought to myself, first of all, I'm getting of an age where I have to think about, I could go, tomorrow, who knows, obviously I'm in good health, but who knows, and I really didn't want to leave something like Robbie to my wife to have to deal with, or my daughter,
Yeah, right.
And I thought they wouldn't have the clues to what to do with Robbie, and there'd be probably a lot of people who'd be like trying to,
take advantage
on it and stuff. So I felt it was probably a better decision, and that way Robbie can move on. And I'd had him for a long time, and I really have gotten my enjoyment out of him. Time for somebody else to enjoy him. So. And I'd seen him through his rough periods.
Yeah, the drinking and the drugs.
Yeah, I found him in the back alleyway at Studio City drinking Will Light.
No, that was better than when he was on his knees, sir. But yeah, it was amazing knowing, because, and it's not that we know each other, but I met you a couple of times. It's like, oh my God, Bill Malone's selling? I couldn't believe it. And I was screaming at my wife Christy, and she was trying to understand what the hell I was saying, and then I was like, you remember he meant, because and I want to end on this, and is that you actually, our first date was House on Haunted Hill, and we told you this story how many of those 7-8 years ago at least, when Parasomnia was there in Indianapolis. And you know what, you won't remember this, but you know what you said? You were looking at me and you looked at her and went, I'm sorry. That was all you said. Our first date was House on Haunted Hill. I'm so sorry. So thank you from both of us. We appreciate it. Thanks for all the years of entertainment.
And thank you for enjoying the films and supporting them. So.
Oh, and we
will continue to do so. Yeah. That's one of the reasons we ask what you have coming up. We're sincerely interested. You mentioned this Island Earth, and I know this is completely unrelated. Does anybody have the inner roster? Does anybody know what happened to the inner roster?
I think it probably got thrown out
Oh.
because I heard a story that somebody saw the remember the ball thing with the lights in it that's in the spaceship and also on the monitors thing. Somebody mentioned that they were over at Universal and they saw it getting bulldozed. So
a perfectly good inner roster laid to waste.
There you go. Yeah. So I don't know. All that stuff's gone.
Oh,
Universal, more than any other studio, did not save stuff.
But why do you think that was? Just a management kind of don't care thing?
Yeah, I think it was just that they didn't have the space for. They felt they didn't want to be, carrying that stuff. So
yeah,
they tended to even their wardrobe. They tended to either give the wardrobe to Western costumes or because a lot of their this Island Earth wardrobe wound up Western. And all their stuff really. So that was their sort of mindset. I think from the get go.
It's interesting, isn't? It just dawned on me. Isn't Young Frankenstein was able to use some of the sets for Frankenstein?
They used the original set, yeah.
So it's I'm just glad that lasted that long, because that's given everything else, that's kind of amazing.
He hung on to all that stuff. Although there's one piece that I still am looking for, which I don't think Strickfaden had, and I won't say what it is, but it's from Frankenstein.
Really? Well, this is between friends. You can't. You don't trust the. You don't trust the.
We assure you, we don't have it.
As they say at the house, I guarantee that we do not have whatever it is that you're looking for.
I just don't want anybody else looking for it.
Oh, I'm sure out there. That's the one thing about the internet. Nothing is. If dream it up
There's
or
nobody
something.
out there looking for it yet.
Yeah. That's true. Somebody somewhere is in a basement right now going, I will find it.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I told you an hour or as long as you want to talk. This has been just a privilege. Thank you so much for saying yes to it.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Haley. I'm waving at you even though I can't see you. So.
That's okay. She's on the back. If you'll hold on for 1 second, unless you're in a huge hurry, we'll cut off and then we'll thank you one more time. Is that okay? Do you have a second? Okay. All right. Thanks. This has been Bonehead. I'm Joe Lewis.
James Thomas.
Chad's out this week. Haley behind the camera. Thank you so much, William Malone. We will talk to you all later.
William Malone intro.
Here's the sound of sexy night at James's.
It's not true. Usually it's...
The sound of sexy night at Jesus. Jesus, all I got is $20.
All right.
Ready?
Yes.
That's 4 Little Caesars pizzas. Hot damn!